In the fitness industry, there is a ton of positive benefits. There's a lot of great things that can manifest out of getting into this whole fitness thing. But there's also some problems. Some people can really get into some more obsessive tendencies, into some things that can really hamper their lives. And on today's episode of The School of Muscle, I have on Dr. Emma Green, and she has a PhD in health psychology. She's a coach. She helps people develop healthy relationships with food, exercise, and their bodies. And in this episode, we discuss mindful eating, strategies to adhere to a diet, how to handle the holidays, how to handle overeating, how to handle feeling guilty about eating certain foods. Is food addiction really a thing? We discuss all of these things in this podcast, so I really hope you enjoy this, and I really think that this can help avoid some of these more negative things that happen with this whole fitness thing. So without further ado, Dr. Emma Green. So kind of the first thing that I'd like to discuss here is kind of what mindful eating is and how that might compare to like more restrictive eating or emotional eating, and maybe some strategies to become more mindful. So I'll just kind of let you take the floor here.
Yeah, sure. So I will say one of the things that's a little bit tricky is that there isn't really a consistent definition of mindful eating that's actually used in the literature. Sometimes the terms intuitive eating and mindful eating are kind of used interchangeably, but to me they are slightly different. So the way that I see mindful eating is it's kind of being aware of sort of what it is you want to eat, so what particular types of food, but also being aware of your own emotions and also the environment that you're in as well. So it's, again, I guess the mindful aspect of it.
Right.
So it's sort of, what you want, your hunger, your emotions, and your environment, not just the what. Whereas I tend to find intuitive eating tends to focus very much on the sort of the what aspect,
Right.
the kind of, how hungry I am, scale of 1 to 10, what is it I want? But I see mindful eating as a little bit broader. And in terms of how it differs from restrictive approaches, I mean, it's the idea is you don't have a list of foods that are kind of good and bad. All foods are on the table that that you like, that doesn't mean that you can't be, I'm vegan myself, right? But that's a choice, right? So it's not that, this is bad or whatever. And it's not, for me, it's not necessarily incompatible with something like tracking your food. So you could still be tracking your food, but the idea is you would just have just an awareness. So for example, say you've got your macro target and it's 2,000 calories a day. For example, say one day you're just aware that you're really, really hungry and you think, actually, you know what, today I'm kind of aware of that. I know what my target is. I'm going to have a little bit more, and then, you then decide how you're going to, if you are going to adjust that going forward. So I don't think it has to be no targets, no, anything like that. But just a kind of, I guess it's a more flexible approach. We use this term flexible dieting a lot, but to me, sometimes flexible dieting doesn't seem that flexible. It's three macros. I hit them every day, and it's to me that isn't true flexibility. I think it's good to sometimes be able to switch things around, to eat foods that you like, to be able to go and eat out in restaurants, to eat socially. If someone cooks you a meal and you don't know the macros, I think it's really important that you still feel able to eat that.
Right. Yeah. So kind of along with this, would like an example of this might be if you're doing it with tracking, would something like maybe you eat your meal until you kind of feel full and then you kind of track what you had after your meal? Or do you still think kind of pre-planning things is a good idea? Or what are kind of some strategies to be a little bit more mindful with your eating?
Yeah. I mean, I think sort of planning in advance helps quite a lot of us, because I think making kind of food decisions in the moment isn't the best. I think particularly if you're quite hungry, you tend to go for sometimes things that are just quick, not necessarily things that are really that filling, and sometimes not even what you want. It's just what you're kind of grabbing. So I think planning in advance is good. Whether that's literally preparing it as well, or even just having an idea. I think sometimes it's quite good to maybe have a couple of options. So maybe you've got a couple of options for dinner. You think, I'll have this or I'll have this. And then when it gets a bit closer to the time, you can think, oh, actually, I think this is what I'm fancying more, right? So you're kind of still making a mindful choice, but it's not from scratch,
Right.
because I think, we all know, right, the whole thing of like, when you're hungry, you don't always make great food decisions.
Right. Yeah.
And the hungrier you are, the harder it is, right? That's
Uh-huh.
the supermarket kind of idea, right? Yeah, I think some planning in advance is good, but kind of I just see it as almost like a check-in, at the time. And it might not even be the actual food itself. Maybe it's even the timing. So maybe you're planning to have dinner at 6 p.m. It gets to 6 p.m. You think, actually, you know what? I'm not that hungry. I'll have it half an hour later rather than 6 o'clock dinner time. Must eat now, because I think, although it may seem like it's half an hour, I think it's really good to be able to make even just small choices that are in tune with what we want, rather than feeling like we have to do things when there's often no particular reason that we do.
Right. Yeah, I know myself, I'll get it caught in my head like, okay, I'm gonna eat at this time and this time and this time, and then like that time will come around. I'm like, sometimes I'll be busy and it'll just bring stress on me because in my head I've already had it planned out that I want to eat at this time, and I think having a more
Yeah.
flexible approach is a good idea with that.
Yeah, I think so. Because we all know it doesn't really matter, but I think it's easy for
Yeah.
it to become quite obsessive, right? And then especially if you're a bit hungry as well, you get a little bit anxious, and your mind just kind of goes. So yeah, I'm really big on kind of as much flexibility as I think works, for that individual and their goals.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think something that I kind of found with tracking macros and stuff like that and kind of just looking at the numbers is I almost lost touch with what it feels like to kind of be full and what it feels like to be hungry. And recently I've really tried to pay attention to that a little more. And, I don't think I'm alone in this position. So is there any advice you'd give to people to kind of be a little bit more mindful and to listen to their hunger cues a little bit better? Or is it just kind of trying to be aware of it? Or what would you kind of recommend there?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes think it's good to actually have a few kind of go-to foods, that are kind of foods that you like and that you enjoy, and almost regardless of macros, because I think sometimes when you get into tracking, you end up sort of eating foods that are kind of macro friendly, whether you like them or not.
Right.
So I kind of think it's good to actually just spend a bit of time thinking, actually, what are the kind of foods and meals that actually I do really enjoy, if I wasn't thinking about the macros, what actually kind of would that look like? And kind of making sure that you are actually incorporating those foods, into your diet, I think. I think it's good for all of us to, make an effort as well to try new foods. I think we can get very stuck on eating the same foods. And, we know from a physical, health perspective, it's good to have variety. But also I just think psychologically it's good to be trying new foods, rather than, I think with tracking, you often end up on quite actually a limited diet, despite calling it flexible dieting.
Yeah.
You eat the same kind of foods because it fits, right? It fits the numbers and things. And again, there's nothing wrong with having a few staples. I'm a creature of habit. I eat fairly similarly each day, but I do make an effort to, try new foods, include things. And I think just be a bit I don't know, almost more like playful with it. Like, it's fine if we try a new food and we don't like it. It's really not a big deal. Like, it's not, people go, oh my God, such a waste of macros. And I think, well, it's like, come on, it's, like, this is, it's just food, And it's always a learning lesson. And again, if you don't have many macros to play with, I get it, right? But it's, I think it's good to try and have that, sort of experimental, playful kind of approach with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good attitude to have about it for sure. And I know that for myself, something that works really well for me is kind of having like you said, a really consistent, like my breakfast and my final meal of the day might be really similar, but my lunch and my dinner, they might change based on if I'm going to go grab a lunch with a friend or dinner with a friend or something like that. So that's something that I really like to do. Do you something like that? Is that kind of what you're talking about with having those staple meals in there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being open to sometimes, changing the plan as well, because I think something that, I struggled with personally for a long time was being able to be spontaneous about food. If anyone asked me anything, the answer was always no. I didn't even think about it. It was just no. I've got my lunch, I've got my snacks. I'd planned this. And I think that is something, and again, you don't have to take up every opportunity, right? It's not that every time there's cake at the office at work, you have to eat it. But I think you should feel like it's an option and you're able to make a decision at that time. So maybe, you've got a protein bar in your bag, but actually, you know what? There's a cookie and it looks really good, and I think, again, it depends on your goals, but I think it's good to really be making, an empowered decision rather than just feeling like these things are like an automatic no. Like you said, being able to grab lunch with friends. Maybe you've planned that, maybe you haven't. But I think, being able to go with the flow a little bit, although it's very difficult, I think, particularly for people that come from a background of tracking and wanting things to be on point and being evidence-based. But I think a bit of that is really good for us,
Yeah, I think so too. And, that I can really relate to that of not wanting to be spontaneous. Like, it's almost like I would isolate myself on purpose just so I could have my pre-planned stuff that I already had planned out, and trying to be more flexible, I think, just benefits like your life and your relationships, things so much like that.
Yeah, I completely agree, because I think that's the thing, yes, food is, macronutrients, it's micronutrients, but it's a lot more. And I actually think we should kind of embrace that. And, it is a way to connect with other people, it is something that should be enjoyable, so yeah, I'm really big on, kind of incorporating the wider aspects of food. Yeah.
I think that's a great strategy. And kind of the next thing that I'd like to touch on is, a lot of people struggle with sticking to a particular way of eating. So do you have any advice or strategies to kind of improve adherence of maybe sticking to a little bit more healthy of a diet, or a diet that's more beneficial for somebody's goals?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things with this. I think quite a lot of it is actually some people's own limiting beliefs about themselves. People think, oh, I'm an all or nothing person. Oh, I just don't like healthy food. All of these kind of ideas. And I think often they're not necessarily true. They're just things that people have kind of told themselves. So I think there does need to be a little bit of kind of work about kind of what are some of the things that you believe about yourself and food, and actually are they true? Are they really things that you don't believe can be changed? So I think there's some work to do there. And then in terms of the actual kind of adherence piece, I think a lot of people try to do too much too soon. It's hard, because I think if you really want to make a change, you think, right, I'm really committed to this, let's go all in, right? And I completely understand that, but it never pays off. I think when people do too much, because then they can't keep it up, and then they have a setback. Often it can be quite a big setback, and then that can be quite a sort of a dent in their confidence. So again, I think it's starting small with this kind of stuff. If you've never tracked before or whatever, maybe don't jump into tracking all 3 macros, right? Maybe just start with protein, right? Or whatever, or just even just writing down what you're eating already. I think starting with these kind of small steps is good. And then you can kind of build momentum from there. And I think the third piece is making sure that actually whatever plan you're doing makes sense for your goals and your lifestyle. So I see a lot of people that are kind of having these almost like bodybuilding contest prep style diets when their overall goal is to gain a bit of muscle or lose a bit of fat. And we don't need to be eating like competitive bodybuilders if we're not competitive bodybuilders, right? It sounds obvious, but it's glorified, right? It's grinding, we're eating clean, we're no days off, right? And I get that we want to be a part of something, so there's that. But I think we do have to think: do I need to be that restrictive for this goal? And again, there are times where we do, right? You want to get on stage wearing very little clothing, yeah, absolutely, that's the time you've got to be on point, right? But if you don't, think about actually, what is the most flexible that I can make this? And again, the bit about it fitting into your lifestyle is, we know that actually you do have a lot of choices in terms of how things can work, right? So, if you're not a breakfast person, maybe something like an intermittent fasting thing is going to work really well for you, right? But equally, maybe that's not for you. Maybe you like eating, small meals little and often or whatever. So I think incorporating your kind of preferences and things is really important. We know some things about sort of optimal ways to eat, right? In terms of eating nutrient dense foods, probably having some kind of spread throughout the day of calories, particularly protein. But within that, we've got lots of flexibility. So I think trying to incorporate your own preferences as much as possible is good. And being being open to changing that, right? I mean, maybe, when me, for example, I've, recently gone from being a student to, I'm now sort of working full time. So I do have a different schedule, and, accordingly, my sort of the way I eat has slightly changed, so I think being open to things, again, not necessarily every single day trying something new, right? But maybe if there's a big shift in our in our lifestyle, then maybe having a rethink of if our current approach is still serving us.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So kind of the three things you're kind of looking at is, number one, not really identifying with someone that just can't do it or someone that's all or nothing. Kind of the second thing is making sure you're starting small, kind of getting the ball rolling. And the third thing is really looking at your why, looking at what you want as a goal, and really trying to pick a flexible approach to get you towards that goal, not being like overly restrictive with that. Does that sound about right there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then for starting small, you mentioned maybe you just start with tracking protein or something like that. Is there anything else that you might recommend for just kind of people if they're kind of coming in kind of new, or say someone's coaching someone that's pretty new? Where would you kind of recommend for starting small with nutrition?
Yeah, I mean, I think things like, we all know we need to be eating more fruit and veg, and I think a lot of us don't. So I even think something like making sure every one of your meals has some type of fruit or vegetable in it is also a great place to start. And again, it sounds obvious, but sometimes I think we're all sometimes guilty when we actually look at our diet and think, oh, actually, there's a few too many just protein bars as meals or whatever, right? So I think things like that are also quite good. And again, it depends how much knowledge the person sort of has about nutrition. But I think, encouraging them to sort of think about having a range of foods perhaps to start with. So, if you have a meal for breakfast, then maybe don't have the same thing again for lunch. Try and, mix it up or whatever. So I guess they'd be some places to start. I mean, it is tricky because I think if you don't have much nutrition knowledge, then there is more of an education piece. Whereas if someone actually has a lot, it's sometimes slightly different sort of strategies. But yeah, and I think taking it slow, sort of day by day, sort of meal by meal. And I think when doing that, trying to be really kind of mindful about it. So, if you have a meal and I don't know, it didn't feel good for you, maybe, you try and identify sort of why that was. We all have foods that just, suit us better or whatever, even if we don't have allergies and things. So I think just encouraging that and having a sort of really open dialogue, if you're working with a coach or even if you're not, perhaps journaling, some of this, and just doesn't have to be anything too intense or whatever. Just a couple of notes about how that made you feel. Maybe how your hunger was or energy, just things like that, so we can start sort of paying a bit more attention to foods and how it makes us feel.
I think those are all great strategies to get the ball rolling for sure. And kind of the next thing I'd like to touch on is with the holiday season coming up or kind of already here, there's some different strategies that are thrown out there to handle the holidays. And is there anything that you see that could be potentially problematic with handling the holidays? And what would you kind of advise like your own clients, or what do you do with yourself to kind of handle the holidays in a way that's not going to totally like distort your goals?
Yeah. I mean, again, and this does depend on what your goal is, I think. Again, if you're competing, you do have to be very strict, pretty much. You're probably still going to have to track, it might be a case of taking Tupperware to places and things like that, because you just don't have that flexibility, I mean, ideally, if your, contest prep can, is flexible in terms of the deadline, then perhaps you can just put a little bit of a pause on. But that may not be possible if that's your goal. But for most people, the deadline is a bit more, kind of flexible, or perhaps they don't have a deadline at all. So I think with this, actually, I'm really big on just focusing on enjoying it, actually. And yes, food is a part of the holidays, and that's great, right? It's a nice way for us to spend time with our families, have foods that we might not have at other times of the year. And I think, not placing too many rules about it, right? So I'm going to go here, but only have this. I think just, again, being a bit more kind of go with the flow, see how it is. I think it's, sometimes we surprise ourselves actually when we don't have as many rules and restrictions. We might go and think, actually, you know what, that looks good. I'm actually not so fussed about that, right? Because it's not off the table. In a way, you're able to make a decision from a much more balanced place, right? Whereas if you're going in with the kind of thing, oh my God, I'm going to eat everything, or oh my God, I can't eat anything, I think that's when it tends to go wrong. Whereas, you know, maybe you have a bit of a game plan. You say, you know what, there's going to be a lot of foods there. I think maybe I'll have, you know, I don't know, a couple of small portions of dessert. You know, you can make a kind of plan. But again, I think it should be kind of flexible. And, you know, it is only a short period of time. And I think, you know, we have so much anxiety about it often. And I think it's really not the end of the world if, you know what, you do eat everything, right? Like it's one day, right? I mean, again, that's not an ideal situation. And I think often if that does happen, that's actually where you've been a bit too restrictive leading up to that. Because I think often if you feel the need to go nuts, that's probably a sign that you are being too restrictive. But if that does happen, it's really not a big deal, you know, like even if it means gain a bit of weight, that, I mean, it's really, you know, again, might not be, you know, probably not in line with our goals, but it's really not the end of the world. And I think that's the other big piece with the holiday is just take it for what it is. And if you have a period and you overeat and you think, oh God, you know, that didn't feel good, try and just learn from it and just move on. You know, maybe identify why. Maybe, you know, some of these articles I see with advice like basically starve all day and turn up so you've got a nice calorie bank. Well, great in principle, but if that means you then eat everything because you're so hungry, including foods you probably don't even like, that wasn't necessarily a winning strategy, was it? So I think reflect on what happened and why, and then just try and move on. You know, I'm really not big on trying to then compensate with calories or doing extra cardio, because I think then you can get into this sort of binge starve cycle actually, and I think that's really not a good spot to be in.
I think that's great. I think going into it with the focus on really just trying to enjoy time is a really good idea. And
Yes.
I really liked what you just said on sometimes if you try, a lot of people recommend to save up calories for the big dinner or whatever, but to me that almost sets you up for worse, because you're going to set yourself up for like a crazy binge and a free for all. And rather than just going into it and kind of eating like an adult, like you're still going to enjoy some foods and have some good stuff, but you're really setting yourself up for a binge if you do that, I think, anyway.
I agree. And I don't think you're able to just enjoy the time with other people as much, right? You go there and you're starving. What we're thinking about, I want to eat, right? You're not engaged in a conversation, right? You don't care what they have to say. You just want to eat. So I think actually the you know, not only the enjoyment of food, but the enjoyment of the whole event, I think is better if you're coming into it in a much more balanced place, you know? So yeah, completely agree.
I totally agree. And something you mentioned there is if you do overeat, try to just identify what it was and try to learn from it. Is there anything else you recommend for people that, you know, maybe it wasn't a holiday, but maybe it was just kind of a random day, or maybe they finished a diet and just couldn't control themselves and they overeat? What is kind of your advice to kind of get over that guilt or some things that you might feel after overeating?
Yeah. I mean, I think if it's more of a kind of emotional thing, perhaps, is seeing kind of what's in your sort of emotional coping toolkit. Because I find a lot of people don't really have a range of strategies to actually deal with their emotions. And so sometimes food is the go-to. And again, I don't think emotional eating is the worst thing in the world. I think it's fine to enjoy cake on a birthday, or, you know what, if you're feeling really crap and you really think a piece of chocolate cake is going to do it for you, go for it. But I think it's good to have a range of strategies. So I think afterwards it's good to reflect on actually what other options maybe do I have available, or could I maybe add? So, you know, things like meditation, maybe things like yoga, so that, you know, we've got a kind of new ways to deal with it next time. You know, so we feel that, you know, yes, maybe there might be another occasion with food, but that's not our only way to deal with it. And again, it's different things for everyone. Maybe it's reading a book. You know, I mean, I like, you know, sort of meditation and things like that. I've realized it's not everyone's bag, but, you know, it can be anything, but just a range of things that that you have to perhaps deal with emotions that can be difficult. Because I think that's the thing, particularly around the holidays and things. These can be quite emotionally charged situations, and we are humans. We're not robots. We do have emotions, and we need to be really proactive about how we deal with them. And I think also reminding ourselves that sometimes we don't have to do anything with our emotions, right? We can have these uncomfortable emotions and sit with them. It's not nice. We don't like feeling sad or angry or upset or anything, but we can deal with that, right? It's someone said once, your emotions won't kill you, but potentially how you deal with them will, and I think that's that really hit me hard when I heard that, and I think it's really true. And so I think having this range of strategies that you can then, hopefully use in these kind of occasions can be really helpful.
Yeah, I really like that. And something that I've noticed is just becoming aware of my emotions kind of prevents them from like escalating. So for example,
Yes.
like when I feel like anxious or something like that, I just kind of make a note of it in my head. Hey, I'm feeling a little bit anxious right now. I'm not trying to like necessarily push it away or do something like that. I'm just kind of noticing it. Have you noticed some similar things to that with emotions and stuff?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, and again, I haven't actually seen a lot of research in it, but I found definitely the same, that when you have this kind of mindful approach, you recognize things earlier. Right, you recognize a low level of things, because I used to think, I never know something until I'm feeling really angry or really upset. But actually, it was just that I wasn't mindful, so I didn't notice it before that stage, right? Like, I think, we know this from, like, say, hunger, right? This kind of like hangry thing. We all recognize that. But actually, there were a lot of points before that when your body was telling you it was hungry, but you were just ignoring it potentially, right? So
Right.
I think, having this general mindfulness where it's just awareness and, but a non-judgmental awareness, right? Of just, I'm feeling this, like exactly like you said. That's, something I'm just noticing. I'm not necessarily doing anything with it. It's just information, right? So
Right.
I think that is really, really valuable as a kind of skill, and it does take time to develop. But I think everyone can develop that level of awareness with practice.
And do you think like through meditation practices that can kind of help with that and things like that?
Yeah, or even just things like sort of gratitude practices, writing down sort of things that you're grateful for, making an effort to kind of look at your environment. So maybe you walk to work or something. Perhaps, you set a task, on the way to work, I'm going to notice 3 things around me or something, because I think we sometimes spend so much time in our heads, I certainly know I do as an introvert,
same.
right? Analyzing things and all this kind of thing. And we sort of miss sometimes what's going on around us. So I think even just simple things like making an effort to notice the things around us, good or bad, right? But just noticing. And yeah, along with I do like these kind of gratitude practices that I think are useful as well. In helping us to be more mindful of things, particularly the sometimes positive things. So I think we all tend to be somewhat oriented towards the negative, right? Which, from a survival standpoint, fantastic. For current daily life, not so good.
Exactly. Yeah, I really like that. Trying to be mindful of things that to be grateful for throughout your life. I think that's a really good practice for everybody. It really helps keep things in perspective and kind of helps bring down the stress from just day-to-day things that you let stress you out. If you're just grateful for what you have, it makes things a lot better in my experience.
Yeah, I agree, and it can be so quick to do, right? I mean, there are apps and things you can do this for. I mean, I've used something called like the 5-minute journal, and again, like it sounds, it's very easy. So I think making this effort to do it, even if it's not every day, each week or something is fine.
Yep, I think so too. And kind of as we're on the topic of emotions and things like that, some people automatically kind of feel guilty about eating like dirty foods or quote unquote dirty.
Yeah.
They always want to eat clean and they feel like they're doing wrong if they're eating a treat or something like that. So how would you kind of advise someone kind of in that position that kind of feels guilty after these types of food?
Yeah, I mean, it is really hard, and it's something actually quite a lot of my clients struggle with as well. I mean, I think it's making a list actually of what these foods are that you do kind of struggle with. And it sounds counterintuitive, but actually making yourself have them more often.
Yeah.
Because I think what tends to happen is people have these kind of negative associations with these foods. So they actually restrict them. And then when they do have them, it's a lot harder, to actually kind of deal with them. They actually are more likely to overeat them if they, have been restricting them, and then they can feel sort of anxious and guilty. But I think actually including them, and again, it doesn't have to be every day, right? But maybe each week you include this food. And I think getting practice at actually, if it's a food you feel you always overeat, practicing actually just eating it more regularly allows you to actually just eat the amount that you need, right? I think people sometimes feel, every time I eat this food, I always overeat it. But I think often that's because you've put it on this kind of pedestal. So I think if have it in your diet more regularly, is a really big kind of factor. Yeah, and I think, I feel like I'm banging on about mindfulness, but I think it's seeing really what are the thoughts and emotions and things that are kind of coming up with each of these foods as well, and thinking about sometimes where they've come from as well. I think can be helpful. Sometimes we do, hang on to things, and we don't really know sort of where they've come from. So I think sometimes we're thinking, what, I remember like reading this a long time ago, and it's kind of always stuck with me, and thinking, actually, what, like I know that isn't true, right? But I don't know why I've still done that. So I think being willing to kind of challenge some of our sort of beliefs about these foods is a key piece of that as well.
I think those are all great strategies there. We tend to want what we can't have a little bit more. So I think by trying to incorporate some of those foods a little bit more often, like you said, it doesn't have to be every day. Every once in a while can really kind of help you get over that mental.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, also making sure that with these foods, we are eating the, like, I hate to say like real versions, but you know what I mean? Because I think, I've also seen a kind of trend of wanting to healthify everything. And I get it, right? Sometimes, a chocolate cake is not always going to fit in your macros, right? I get it. But I do think we have to think about actually, are these substitutions really serving us? Because if they're not, probably what's going to happen, we're going to either overeat the substitutions, or again, we're in that same position where we're not really having what we want. And then when we finally do get it, we're going to overeat that. So I think that's maybe just another thing as well. It's just be aware of, are these sort of substitutions things that actually we do really enjoy and do serve us.
Right. I think that's great too, because these low calorie like ice creams and stuff like that, I'll see people posting a whole bunch about them, and even in the caption they'll say something like, it's not the real thing, but close enough. But like you said, that could be just another form of restricting themselves from the real thing that could potentially hurt them down the road.
Yeah, for sure. And again, some of these things work better for others. It's not that it can never work, but I think being aware of, it actually, do you like it, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. And kind of the last thing that I'd like to touch on here is food addiction, and whether like food is addictive. And something, I don't remember where I heard it, but the other day I heard that anything that gives you like a dopamine response can be, and I'd really appreciate it if you would touch on this topic of food addiction, and if it's a thing, what's kind of going on here.
Yeah. So I will say that there isn't a consistent opinion in the literature. My view is food addiction is not a thing. So I will put that out there. That's how I feel. The dopamine argument certainly gets thrown around a lot. And I think it's problematic if we're defining things only in biological terms to start with, right? I think we have to see things in a kind of broader way. I mean, if we look at there's something called the DSM, which is like the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Essentially, it's if something is a psychological disorder, it's in the book, right? And addiction in there, it has to be something that interferes with your ability to function in daily life, right? To meet the criteria for being an addiction, right? Which we would recognize obviously in things like alcohol addiction, drug addiction, right? That is interfering with people's ability to function in their daily life, perform their normal tasks or whatever. So from that criteria, I think, when we're talking about food, we're really talking about something quite different, you know, to that. If we look at the literature as well, pretty much 90% of the literature is on rats and mice, right? And we know they're different. And again, it's not that, you know, animal research has no bearing, but it is, when we're talking about something like food, it's hugely different. It's like some of the stuff we've been talking about. Food is social. Food is, you know, it's so much more than just kind of nutrients, right? We eat a much wider range of foods than a rat or a mouse does, you know? So we can't necessarily deduce things that come out of those studies into kind of how it is for humans as well, you know? I mean, and in terms of some of this stuff, some of this is a very normal response. We are supposed to like food. We are supposed to enjoy that. That's central to our survival, right? I mean, things like having a dopamine release from food is actually it's a good thing, right? If we didn't enjoy food, we'd all die because we wouldn't eat, right? So I think we have to be careful that we're not pathologizing quite a normal response, you know? And again, we know that there are these hyper palatable foods. I'm not going to deny that. We all know, you know, you say chips, right? I would say crisps, right? You know, things like that, really high in fat and salt, stuff like that. Chocolate. Yes, we know all these things are kind of hyper palatable. But I think addiction is not really what we're talking about there. We're talking about foods that are really, really enjoyable. We're not talking about something that is really addictive. Like I said, it's not generally something that's interfering with people's ability to function in everyday life, you know? And it's, yeah, so I mean, and there are people that struggle with food, but largely I see that as those are kind of emotional issues where food just happens to be how it manifests. Right. So we know this from eating disorders, right? They're not about food. Food is how it happens to manifest, but these are really kind of emotional issues, right? So you know, and I would say that of all eating disorders, you know, anorexia, bulimia, you know, binge eating disorder that's now in the DSM, etc., are, you know, they're very real, and I absolutely do not want to you know, be saying that those aren't, but then although people struggle with food, that's just a manifestation of their issues. It's not about the food itself, right? It's not an addiction, right? It's, you know, their way of dealing with their emotions and or a kind of reaction to what they've been doing, right? So we know in kind of bulimia, people that typically binge, it's where they've heavily restricted beforehand, right? So it's a response to that kind of behavior. It's not really about the foods themselves, you know? So yeah, it's tricky. And again, like I said, that the literature is not consistent, well, in terms of how researchers talk about. There are researchers that do believe that food addiction is a thing. I don't, because like I said, you know, we're humans, we're not rats, and the human literature of the very little amount there is does not indicate that food addiction is real. Eating disorders, certainly. Food addiction is not, in my opinion.
I think that definitely clears it up a lot for me anyways. And like you said, it's not to say that down the road we might not see more literature and change our minds about some of this stuff, but right now it just doesn't seem like there. And I really liked how you're like, no, it's probably not necessarily the food per se. It's more so an underlying emotion that's driving that behavior. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. A way of dealing with things. And I think that's the thing, you know, food is a kind of socially acceptable, you know, kind of way of dealing with you know, with emotions, I think. And you know, I think if you look at people, you know, that have different kind of issues, it's their struggle in dealing with them. It's not it's not the actual food itself. It's just that happens to be a kind of a learned strategy for dealing with these things, you know. So yeah, and again, you know, there may be more literature that comes out, and we do kind of rethink that, and you know, obviously I'm, you know, open to that, right? Like I would consider myself evidence based, which means that, you know, I'm kind of honest about the state of the literature, but open to of new ideas, emerging about it. So yeah, and it is, is an area, particularly in humans, that we do have quite limited, research on. I think the only other thing I will say about food addiction as well is I think it's not really helpful for someone to label themselves as having a food addiction, because I think then we get into that kind of, if you're telling yourself that you are a food addict or you are addicted to something, then you're kind of going to have a self-fulfilling prophecy where if you tell yourself you are addicted to chocolate, well, you're going to overeat chocolate, right? So I think that's the other piece as well, and I think we have to kind of challenge these ideas, because I think, if we don't, we then risk having a relationship with food that is actually just based on our own beliefs and misconceptions about ourselves, so I think that's the other piece to it, is that really think about, even if you believe, food addiction is a thing, is labeling yourself in that way helping you or harming you, because I don't see it as being a kind of a helpful thing in people establishing a more kind of healthy relationship with food over the long term.
I totally agree. Not like identifying as someone that's addicted to a certain food. I think that's a really, really great strategy there. And like, is there anything else like in this field, in this topic, that you're really like excited about up and coming research in? Maybe it's mindfulness, maybe it's, mindful eating, food addiction, anything like that, anything that you're really excited about coming up here?
Yeah, well, I'm really interested in the kind of emerging research on mindfulness. And I think we're finding out that there are different ways to be mindful apart from meditation. And I'm particularly excited to find out about these different strategies that we have. Because like I said, I'm a big fan of meditation. I realize it's not for everyone, but I think mindfulness is for everyone. I really do. And so I think I'm really excited to find out about the different ways that actually we can incorporate mindfulness into our lives. And again, there's, quite a limited evidence base, but certainly more that is coming. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing what that entails.
Yeah, me as well. And like you said, meditation, I feel like it's something that is almost a little bit like stigmatized, like, oh, you meditate, you think you're something special, but man, I think that it can have really great benefits. And for me personally, I'm someone that gets caught up in my own head a lot, and it especially manifests itself like if I wake up in the middle of the night, or if I'm trying to go to bed, it's something that my head keeps turning, and meditation has definitely helped me just ease my mind in those situations, and has really helped a lot for sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I found the same as well. I listen to one kind of before I go to bed. And in fact, if I now wake up during the night, I put on a guided meditation on YouTube, because I'm just like you. My mind will go to something that doesn't matter, but seems like it's really important at 3 a.m. or whatever, So yeah, I think it's a great strategy. Yeah,
for sure. Well, that's awesome. Well, where can people find you and more about you and things you're doing, Emma?
Yeah, sure. So probably the best place to find me is Instagram. So my handle on Instagram is Vegan Fitness PhD. So yeah, that's probably the best place. I'm kind of building a website at the moment, so that will be up and running shortly. But Instagram's my kind of hub, really, I guess. So it's the best place to find me. Yeah.
And you offer a little bit of coaching and stuff over there as well?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I do kind of one-on-one coaching with clients. A lot of the stuff we've talked about today, really helping them have a more, healthy relationship with sort of food and exercise. So I don't work with sort of competitors or anything like that, but it's just people that have been kind of struggling a little bit with having this sort of balance. And I love working with those people. And it's just really rewarding to see the kind of freedom that people get back when they can stop all this kind of obsession, right?
Yep, for sure. I definitely think that, this whole fitness thing has a lot of benefits, and there's a lot of great things that can come with it. There's also some negative sides with this mindfulness and things like that. And I'm really glad we got people like you out there helping people with this and educating people. So thank you so much for coming on and giving me your time today.
Oh, no, you're welcome. No, this has been really fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode. Make sure to go check out Dr. Emma Green's stuff. Make sure to check out my stuff at ryanjsolomon.com, and I will see you in that next one.